Abduction. This is another very interesting one. I'm sure you'll find this interesting too. So, John E. Mack. Now, this individual, before I read to you his quote, he wrote a book called Abductions. Professor John E. Mack. He was a professor at Harvard University, and he was the head of the Department of Psychiatry. So he was a big guy academically, right? He was a well-respected academic, and he started to study the abduction phenomenon. And he wrote a book called Abductions, and he did a lot of research into this topic. And he was ridiculed for this. He was shunned for this, and not surprisingly, because of the materialistic paradigm or the world that we are a part of today. But he took this very seriously. And he concluded that this is a real phenomenon. Something really is going on. This is not just a psychological projection of the mind of human beings, as psychologists would interpret. And he was a psychiatrist himself, and he believed something real was going on. And he says here, some have suggested that an alien abduction. Some have suggested that in alien abductions we are dealing with some sort of mass psychosis, hysteria, or hallucination. But abductions do not resemble mass phenomena. Abductees are generally individuals who have, at least before being brought in contact with other experiences for purposes of support, been isolated from people having similar experiences. Right now, this is, I believe, back in the early, possibly the 90s, I think. And so, we didn't have mass social media and stuff like this. People were having experiences of abductions, and they have been throughout the centuries. It's just been reported more so since the 40s and so on. But it's a real phenomenon that's been going on all over the world. People have been abducted or claim to have been abducted. And during these abductions, they have these engagement with these aliens. Sometimes they just go through some strange medical procedures that don't make sense from the perspective of, they were aliens, highly evolved, intelligent, developed aliens from other planets, and the sort of the way they are conducting experiments on human beings is very strange. Sometimes you have that element, and then on the other side you have that contact from the perspective of a communication and a dialogue, where the deception element comes in. And one thing I didn't mention in the deception section was, I think it was Ted Peters who made this analysis that there's been a deception of origin as well. So when these beings or these abductions were happening in the early 90s, they would claim they were from Mars. And then later, as science progressed, and from Venus, and when they later on science discovered that Venus is uninhabitable, you can't stay; it's too hot for human life to exist or any life to exist. Then during later abductions, the story changed. Then they said they were from Mars, and then later they changed it again. Then they said they were from a different planetary system. I think in the Betty and Barney Hill incident, they showed a space map, and when I think Betty or Barney, one of them, drew the map out, it just didn't make any sense from the perspective of what we knew about the stars in the sky, about astronomy. So the deception takes place during this abduction phenomenon, right? A lot of times, this contact happens during the abduction phenomenon. Now, according to Johnny Mack, the abduction phenomenon is real. His book has countless examples of it. I believe many other authors have written books on the abductions and abduction cases. The literature is out there, right? So it's been studied, this particular aspect of the phenomenon. Now, what's very interesting is that there is at least one clear narration of jinn abduction within Islam. This particular narration, and I'm not going to read the whole narration, but I'm going to summarize it for you. You guys can read it for yourself or screenshot it. This incident took place during the reign of the Caliph Umar, radiallahu anhu, where a man disappeared. His wife came and said her husband's disappeared, and Umar told her to wait for a period of 4 years. She waited for a period of 4 years. She returned, and he still hadn't returned. And then he nullified her marriage, and she moved on. And then, lo and behold, this individual reappears, and he comes to Umar, and he sees, asks about his wife and his family. And Umar says, "Well, your wife moved on. Well, what happened? Where did you go? You just disappeared. No one knew if you were dead or alive. What was going on?" And then he proceeds to tell Umar his story, and he tells him that I was leaving to pray Isha one night, and I was abducted by a group of jinn, and they kept me a captive. And there's the whole story is there, and you can read it. And then what happened was that another group of jinn, believing jinn, came, invaded. They destroyed this evil group of jinn, and then they asked me if I wanted to return to my family, and I said yes. And then they returned me to my family, and he came back. This is how he came back. And then Umar believed his story, and further gave him a few options as to what he could do in regards to his ex-marriage. And this is a story. It's there within our tradition, right? If you read again Ibn Taymiyyah's essays on the jinn, you can see similar stories about abductions, people being dragged out of their homes at night. If you look at now, if you open this up to Islamic history, and the history of the Arabs, you will see many stories of abductions of people and people being captured and taken away, right? So the abduction phenomenon is there within the Islamic tradition. It's linked directly to the jinn. So this is another clear parallel between the phenomenon and the jinn, and a very interesting one for that.